name's Carla, and today I'm going to be talking about a feature from the open source iOS app called Corona Tracker. This app was created by Samabox Labs, and it's obviously a very timely app for everything that's going on in the world right now. So before I launch into my specific feature, I kind of want to provide a brief overview of the app in general. So I have it open here in Xcode and also launched on the simulator. And basically what this app does is it provides an overview of statistics on COVID-19 from places around the world. It will specifically provide the number of confirmed cases, the number of recovered, and the number of deaths in whatever place you're looking at. When you first launch the app, you're shown worldwide statistics, but you can kind of move around the map to look at any one place that particularly interests you. And then you see stats for that place specifically. So you can also drag this up and see some more detailed charts on daily new cases, the growth of cases, most affected countries. You can share any of these charts. And of course, you can see where this data is being sourced from. So it's a very robust app. Having looked through the code, a lot of this core functionality was implemented using the MapKit framework, as well as a third-party framework called Charts, which I believe was actually modeled off of the MP Android chart library that we're using in the Canary app. And then also this library called Disk, which allows data to be stored or cached locally. I assume for performance reasons, it's better to not have to re-download the entire data set every time you use the app. But the feature that I specifically want to talk about is not in the app itself, but is rather an extension of the app, and that is the Today widget, which was contributed to this app by a developer named Piotr Ożóg. And let's take a look at the widget. You can see it when you long press on the app icon. And you can also add it directly to the Today view of the notification center on your phone. And what the widget does is it shows just the worldwide data, the number of confirmed, number of recovered, and number of deaths. And every 3 seconds, it switches these two from numbers to percentages, which I think are a little bit more digestible. So as I said, this feature is called an extension of the app. And per the Apple documentation, an extension is defined as something that lets you extend custom functionality and content beyond your app and make it available to users while they're interacting with other apps or the system. And there are many types of extensions, and the Today widget is just one of them. But that makes sense because when you're using the Today widget, you're not actually in the app, you're outside of it in the notification center of your phone. And some documentation specifically about what the Today widget's purpose is that it's supposed to display a small amount of timely, useful information or app-specific functionality. And per the HIG, it should be glanceable and it should show content quickly. So this app, the Corona Tracker app, is really a great candidate to have a Today widget because people want to see that quick, up-to-date information on how the pandemic is going around the world. All right, so let's jump into the actual code and see how the Today widget is actually implemented and how it's working. All the code for it is actually contained in this group here called widget. So it's these 3 files. We have todayviewcontroller.swift, main.storyboard, and info.plist. So let's just take a quick look at the main.storyboard. And we can see that it is a lot smaller than the storyboards that we've been working with so far. When building iOS apps, you're dealing with widget real estate, not the real estate of the entire screen. But besides that, it's much the same. You can open the tree here and see that there's still labels, the activity indicator view, you can have stack views, constraints. So a lot of the same objects that we use to design on a normal storyboard. And you can connect all of these to the view controller through outlets. So the view controller, the Today view controller, is really the heart of this feature. We can see it is like a typical UI view controller, like the ones that we've been working with, but also calling attention to the fact that there's an import statement for notification center here at the top. And this view controller specifically implements a protocol called NC widget providing. It has a view did load method, the typical lifecycle method of any view controller, but it also has this function called widget perform update, which is a part of the NC widget providing protocol. So let's dive into some of the documentation to learn more about Notification Center and this protocol and how the widget perform update method actually works. So pulling up the documentation, we see that Notification Center is a provided framework to create and manage widgets for the Today view. So it provides an interface that you can use to specify whether a widget has data to display and also to customize its appearance and its behavior. You can scroll down to the topics here and you can see there's all sorts of protocols and classes to show a search view in a widget, to show a list view in a widget, but the one that this app is specifically using is the NC widget providing protocol, which is just the basic interface for, customizing the way that a widget looks and behaves. So let's jump into that. Again, there's a ton of different functions that are not being used in this app. There's a function to customize the widget margins. There's a function to expand and the opposite of expand, shrink your widget if you can show more or less detailed information. There's support for user editing of the widget. But again, we are just using this widget perform update method, which just makes it possible for the widget to update its contents. The most basic thing. So the widget perform update method, I wouldn't say that this documentation is the most clear, but basically what you do inside this method is you run any code that you might need to retrieve new data that needs to be shown in the widget. And then depending on whether you retrieve new data successfully or you didn't actually retrieve any new data or the data retrieval completely failed, you call this system provided completion handler with a value of type NC update result. And NC update result is an enum type, which can either have the value new data, no data, or failed. So if you call it with any of these two, the widget knows that it doesn't need to update its display because there isn't any new data. And if you call the completion handler with new data, then obviously the widget knows there is new data and it should update how it looks. So going back to the code, let's just walk through how this specific widget is actually working. In the view did load method, it calls this function called initialize view, which is defined down here. And all that does is kind of set up some styling for the objects that are already on the storyboard. So making sure that the text color is white, making sure that the labels are uppercased. And then the rest of the view did load method is trying to load any data that's already been cached by the app's data manager. And then we jump into widget perform update, which is where the code actually runs to try and download any new data. And this is the completion handler that I was talking about. Based on whether data manager successfully downloads new data or not, this completion handler will be called with either NC update result new data or NC update result failed. And then the widget uses the app's data manager again to try and load whatever report was downloaded. And then it will call this update method over here, which is where the labels actually get populated with the statistics that were downloaded. And then it calls this update stats method. And this is how we actually get the switch between numbers and percentages every 3 seconds in the widget. Basically, the way that this method works is that the first thing it does is create a new dispatch work item that's going to execute in 3 seconds. And that item is going to toggle the flag for showing percentages or numbers, and then run this entire update stats method again. So basically every 3 seconds, this method is running itself. And then it actually, does the swapping of numbers from percentages, or the swapping between numbers and percentages. And so I took the liberty of adding in some log statements for these methods to see the order and frequency at which they execute. But one thing that I should note is that if we were to just run the Corona tracker, and try to look in here for these print statements, we wouldn't actually see them. And that's because this Corona group and this widget group are actually different targets of the app. And just quickly jumping to the Apple documentation for what a target is, it specifies a product to build and the instructions for building that product from a certain set of files. So the in the app, there's the Corona Tracker target and the widget target. And what the Corona Tracker target is building is the entire main app that we looked at earlier, versus the widget target is just building the Today widget. And so they're separate things. And in order to actually see those print statements that I put in, I would have to change my target for the simulator to build to the widget target. So we can relaunch that and then open up the simulator, and we see that we're brought directly to the Corona Tracker target. And there we go. All right, so now we can see these print statements. And we see that, going back to the view controller, view did load runs first, which calls initialize view to set up the styling. And then we see the data manager do its thing, or sorry, then widget perform update runs, which asks the data manager to actually download the data. And the widget manager does that, calls its APIs, successful download. So we would have called this completion handler with NC update result new data. Update then runs to populate the labels with the statistics, and then update stats runs for the first time and continues to run every 3 seconds. So we would be able to see that every time the percentages and numbers swap, a new update stats call gets printed over here. All right, so that's the Today widget for this app. One last thing that I should mention related to what I talked about earlier about how these are two different targets. When you first create a widget, by default, the files in this widget group would not have access to any of the files in this main app group. But as you saw, this widget needed to use the main app's data manager in order to load and download data. So one thing the developer could have done is just, copy paste this file and kind of just duplicate it within the widget group. But that's not very dry, that's not very maintainable, it's more error prone. If something goes wrong, you have to fix it in multiple places. So the official recommendation from Apple on how to handle this is to create a custom framework that will contain any of the code that needs to be shared between different targets in your app. And I don't have the time to explain how that works, but I will provide helpful links and tutorials about that in the description of this video. But anyway, that was the Today widget of the Corona Tracker, and that's all I have to talk about. So thank you for listening.